I now call on the distinguished Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka, Chair of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories, to introduce the 55th report of that committee. Ambassador Pieris, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories, I present the committee's 55th report with a sense of sadness. Madam Chair, for this year's report, the Special Committee took a historical perspective. This report was finalized 30 years after Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands on the South Lawn of the White House in September of 1993, launching the Oslo peace process. In accordance with its mandate, this historical overview focused on growing settler influence on Israeli policies and practices. Sadly, this 30-year overview is but a tragic prelude to October 2023, which provides the backdrop to this unfolding tragedy. Madam Chair, on the 7th of October, the world witnessed an attack on Israeli civilians on a scale we have never seen before. We mourn the Israeli civilians, foreign nationals, and other civilians killed, injured, or taken hostage in southern Israel on that tragic day. Since October 8th, we have been witnessing a constant bombing by Israel on Gaza. On October 11th, a strike by the Israeli Air Force on an UNRWA refugee camp in Gaza killed 13 members of the same family. By October 12th, Palestinian fatalities already outnumbered the horrific toll of 1,400 Israeli fatalities on the 7th of October. By mid-October, Palestinian mothers were writing their children's names on their bodies in the hope that if their children are killed in an Israeli airstrike, their remains may be identified. Madam Chair, we grieve for United Nations colleagues. Since October 7th, 88 UNRWA colleagues have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, along with their families. Despite catastrophic suffering and losses, UNRWA remains one of the last remaining lifelines for survival in Gaza, as water, food, medicine, and fuel supplies are exhausted. We also take cognizance of the loss of life amongst media and medical personnel. The Special Committee reiterates its call for this Assembly and its member states to provide UNRWA with predictable and sustainable funding to ensure service provision to millions of Palestinian refugees and to preserve Palestinian rights, dignity, and hope, particularly for women and children. Madam Chair, just as Israel's occupation does not justify the attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October, Hamas's actions on the 7th of October do not justify Israel's war since then. On the 9th of October, Israel's defense minister ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. Defense Minister Gallant said Israel was fighting, quote, human animals and will act accordingly, close quotes. The Israeli government's dehumanization of Palestinians and Israel's consistent violations of international law have led us to this point, or contributed substantially to this point. Hate speech and incitement to violence by the most senior representatives of the State of Israel cannot find accommodation in this day and age. This March, settler leader Bezalel Smotrich, who is also Israel's finance minister and an additional minister in the Ministry of Defense, echoed the extremist views of Defense Minister Gallant and called for the State of Israel to, quote, wipe out the Palestinians' West Bank village of Huara. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who supports unlawful activity and incitement to racism, has spent the past fortnight handing out weapons to settlers in Hebron and to other settlers across the occupied West Bank. Madam Chair, Minister Smotrich and Minister Ben-Gvir are not representative of all Israelis. That's not to be mistaken. Less than 10% of Israelis are settlers. Likewise, Mohammed Daif, the commander of Hamas military wing, does not represent all Palestinians in Gaza either. It may be noted that elections were held last in Gaza in January of 2006. By the end of October, Israeli forces had killed more children in Gaza than other militaries had killed worldwide since 2019. 70% of the more than 10,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza over the past month are women and children. The civilians include humanitarian, medical, and media personnel. This statistic is almost unheard of in wars this century. And yet, as I deliver this report, the aggression continues unabated. Madam Chair, it is of concern that Israel has not granted the Special Committee access to the occupied territories since this committee was established in 1968. This year, the committee traveled to Jordan, as it does every year. Jordan was the second Arab country to make peace with Israel. And King Abdullah is the custodian of Jerusalem's holy sites, as recognized in this Assembly's Jerusalem Resolution and Article 9 of the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty. At a peace summit in Cairo on the 21st of October, King Abdullah spoke hard truths to his friends in Europe. The king said, and I quote, "The message the Arab world is hearing is loud and clear. Palestinian lives matter less than Israeli lives. The application of international law," he said, was optional. And human rights, he said, have boundaries. They stop at borders, they stop at races, and they stop at religions. Excellencies, this is not a world we can accept. We must do better than this. This year, the Special Committee also traveled to Egypt for the first time since 2014. Egypt was the first Arab country to make peace with Israel, and the leader to do so, Anwar Sadat, died for it. President El-Sisi, who hosted the peace summit on the 21st of October, demanded a ceasefire and demanded a two-state solution, but was equally astonished at prevailing double standards. Madam Chair, to quote from the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, quote, "It is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression. Human rights should be protected by the rule of law." Close quotes. Israel's continued occupation, oppression, and flagrant disregard for Palestinian human rights is at the heart of this conflict. Speaking at this very podium almost half a century ago, in the main General Assembly Hall, Yasser Arafat said, quote, "I come to you bearing an olive branch in one hand and a freedom fighter's gun in the other," close quotes. He then warned the world to a standing ovation. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand. Close quotes. In the 49 years that have passed since this historic speech, distinguished delegates, Israeli settlers have thrown the olive branch to the ground, burned the olive tree, and neutralized the farmer. Madam Chair, in the words of Yitzhak Rabin, quote, "You don't make peace with friends. You make it with very unsavory enemies," close quotes. Such wisdom is the mark of a great leader. A block, as you would have seen, of 2nd Avenue between 42nd and 43rd Street has been known as Yitzhak Rabin Way since 1995, a testament to this man and the peace he died for. Madam Chair, 75 years ago, next month, this Assembly will adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is indeed a remarkable document, drafted by a generation that endured the evils of the Second World War, including the Holocaust. One shudders to think what the drafters of this document would make of our world today, in which leaders of a state formed in the ashes of the Second World War call for Palestinian villages to be wiped out. Distinguished delegates, never again. The word never again applies to all peoples. This war must end now. History is already judging us all. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ambassador Pieris for his statement.